So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Romola D Reports, Newsbreak 46. This is Romola D, and I'm here this afternoon with a very illustrious crew of reporters who are going to be telling us all about what's happening in the Lynda Thayer case. As everybody knows, Lynda Thayer has been very wrongfully extradited. She's been in a French prison. Pardon me while I fix that. Um, this has to do with the long-term persecution of David Noakes and Lynda Thayer, who've been helping humanity with the cure for humanity, the body's natural cure for cancer, GCMAF. And so today we have some breaking news in the Lynda Thayer story, and I'm going to leave it to everybody here to report that news. I'm here with Neelu Berry, pharmacist, whistleblower, journalist, extraordinary activist, who spearheads so many of the actions of informing the public about what's going on in various cases. I'm here with David Noakes, the president and CEO of Immunobiotech, who is at the heart of this story, is just as much as Lynda Thayer. And I'm here with Scott Dips, attorney and president of the National Health Federation, which I understand is one of the oldest truth, freedom, and health foundations in the world. And I will turn the floor over to Scott at this point to tell us more about the current news and also about the National Health Federation. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today.
Well, thank you, Romola, very much for giving us this opportunity to be here today. The thing about the National Health Federation, it is actually the oldest in the world, the oldest health freedom organization. We've been around next month, it'll be 65 years. And part of our mission is really protecting men and women who are put in this position, as Lynda has been, where they've been thrown into prison simply for speaking freely and trying to help people. And that's really what they've done. She and David Noakes have done a tremendous job at helping people get well. No one's been hurt, no one's been injured. And to the contrary, they've saved many, many, many lives in many different areas of health. And, as they say, no good deed goes unpunished. The NHF is about trying to prevent that punishment from happening on certainly innocent people. And that was the case with Lynda. So obviously we've known, and I've known Lynda a long time, not as long as David. I've known David a while, just as well, equally as long. And in fact, David is our chairman of the board of the National Health Federation and has been for most of this year, actually. And we hope to see that continue. But poor Lynda has been languishing, as you said, quite correctly, in a prison, a women's prison in Paris. Fleury Margui, and it's long past time that she come out. And what happened is, if I may say, is that NHF retained a legal team, a really excellent legal team that had already won some really high-profile battles in France. And I had a lot of confidence in them. And last Friday, November 29th, our attorney, a woman named Chloe Arnoux, Arnoux, went into court, and against all odds, she convinced this very severe judge, but a fair judge, he really listened to the case, that the law supported releasing Lynda Thayer from prison because the European Court of Justice had essentially said that within the EU, no country can issue a European-wide arrest warrant on the basis of a prosecutorial discretion. That is, it has to be an independent judge. And as none of those EAWs, let me just call them that, European arrest warrants, had been issued in France, by an independent judge, they were essentially all invalid. So you can see this is a landmark case, and really earthquake, earth-shaking case, because in one fell swoop with this, it seems to happen with Lynn and David as it is, because they're always sort of setting these landmark situations in motion. And this is one of them. So now the judge ordered her release as of December 8th, that is this very Sunday. And the question now on everyone's mind is, what will the government do in the face of this? On one hand, you have the government saying, well, they can't live with this sort of precedent that's been set by this particular judge. And so there's a big, strong impetus for them to go and have it set aside at the Court of Appeals in Paris. And you would think that's an easy answer right there and an easy guess as to what they will do. But let's look at it another way. Right now, it's a decision by one judge on one case that may or may not have widespread precedence. We think it does have widespread precedence. Our legal team thinks the same. However, if they take it up on appeal and the Court of Appeals rules against them, against the state, and in our favor, then they have a significantly larger problem, because then you have a precedent that's set in pretty much in stone. I mean, you have something that is really clear cut and it's covering the whole nation. It's not just a localized one-off kind of decision by a lower level judge. You have it by the Court of Appeals. So they also have the impetus, the government does, to not do anything, let it die a quiet death. Maybe one person gets free, and then they still do what they want with all the other EAWs that have been issued against everyone else. But see, this is the brilliant thing about this. Now, David, in his situation in England, can take this decision made with respect to Lynda Thayer and say, look, I'm in the same boat as she is, and you have no right to enforce the extradition order from France, where it's blatantly illegal under EU law, where the EU Court of Justice has said that this is wrong and they are illegal and they should have no effect. And I really honestly don't see how an English judge could go against that, given what's happened in France as of last Friday. But getting back to Lynda Thayer, so she was already under a European arrest warrant. The only reason they were in court on Friday was because that original arrest warrant is only good for X number of days. I'm sorry, I don't remember how many days, but only X number of days. And it was due to expire. So the government, that is, had to go in and seek an extension of time on that. And that's why anyone was even in court. So that's why the decision was made. The judge saw that the EAW would expire as of December 8th. And so Lynda Thayer should be released on that date. We aren't sure if it will really happen. You know how the system is. It could be a day or two later, but it should be on the 8th. Well, the same way that David Noakes should have gotten out of prison a month before, and you saw how long it took them. So I have very little faith in the system working like clockwork, but at least you have the idea of what's going on there. Now, the other judges can't be too happy about this, but obviously we're thrilled, and I intend to be there when she gets out of prison and help escort her away from there and get her where she needs to go. And where that will be, we still aren't quite sure. We'll know more. I know she would like to go home to England and do that, and there is a very strong possibility that she can do just that. There are some legal issues with that we need to address, maybe more privately, that I can't go into on this program. However, the fact of the matter is that we gained a very significant victory. I met with the attorneys today, both Chloe Arnaud and another attorney who's sort of like the supervising attorney there in Paris. And I really got a lot of information, and Chloe, that is, did a really fantastic job. She pulled a rabbit out of the hat and just won when everyone, including the supervising attorney, including me, including David, including Lynn, thought she would lose, but she didn't. Now, I did hear another thing, which I hadn't understood. There was evidently some sort of interrogation that had happened of Lynn Thayer and David Halsell at the same time in the presence of one another just last Tuesday. So what is it, a week ago today? And
Maybe
that
David
happened.
can jump in and tell us who David Holsler is. So people
Yes, good idea.
David Halsell is the only
David, you're
Uh-oh.
frozen at your end. Something's
in
happened with
professional companies.
Yeah,
David.
it
Do you
must be.
mind repeating that, David? Because I think your transmission was frozen for a second. We didn't hear you.
David Halsell is the only
Oh dear, it's happened again.
member. There were two little GCMF companies in France. We weren't one of them.
I'm sorry, it happened again, David. This is terrible. I think somebody is obviously kind of breaking in and stopping this transmission, or it just could be because it's transcontinental. But
Maybe I could say for David, because I think I know what he's saying, and he pronounces David Halsell's name better than I did. So I'll correct my pronunciation. David worked for another company, not for David Halsell, that is, worked for another company, not David Noakes's. And he actually ended up in doing some prison time in France, 4 or 5 months, and then he got out. I'm not sure about his current legal status. However, he is still under some sort of control by the government, by the prosecutor's office. So he had to appear, and both parties were there with counsel. David Halsell had his, Lynn Thayer had hers, meaning Chloe. Chloe advised Lynn not to give any answers to questions. David Halsell's attorney didn't so advise him, so David Halsell basically spoke for quite some length, and that was all recorded and all of that. And that's pretty much what I knew. He spoke, what I do understand is he spoke highly of Lynn, and I believe he spoke highly of David Noakes as well. He didn't say any bad things about them, but that's pretty much all I know, and I haven't seen the transcript. But anyway, I thought it very curious that they appeared for interrogation just shortly before the hearing. And I think Chloe's advice, which is not a secret because it's given in front of the whole courtroom, it was good advice to not have, usually it's a bad idea, speaking as an attorney with many years experience in the courtroom, at least in America, not here in Europe. I think it's usually a bad idea to talk to the police, especially if they have, if they're holding something against you. And I don't mean literally, I just mean if they have a grudge against you or the like, because they'll twist your meaning no matter how innocent you might be. They can just take snippets out of it. I mean, witness the BBC program Assassination of David, where he spent 2 hours with them, opened his heart to them, expecting fair treatment. And instead, they gave a 5-minute snippet of all the worst things they could string together and within that 5 minutes about GCMAF and about immunobiotech. So, one always has to be careful about appearing on any mainstream programs or dealing with mainstream authority. And, that's certainly the case here. So in any event, it is curious that happened. Now, a good question. I think this was Neelu's question was, what about Lynn's passport? Where is it? And I had understood from David that it was taken from her by the Cornwall police when she was extradited. And I don't know where her passport is, but it is supposed to be given to her when she leaves, and she should have her passport, which would allow her, if the EAW is invalid, is illegal, France has no hold on her. She
Neelu,
should be.
did you want to jump in and talk about that too? Because you and David Noakes know a great deal about this, I understand.
Well, I think I just want to say that it's very dangerous, the fact that her passport didn't accompany her to France. And there needs to be an investigation how she actually did manage to get into France without it, if she hasn't got it, and why the British Embassy hasn't jumped in with it and provided.
Neelu, is this very, very irregular for somebody to especially in the with the accompaniment of officials and authorities, so-called officials and authorities? Is it irregular for such a person to be divested of their papers, their passport?
Well, may I answer, or you want
Sure,
to
both
answer?
of you. Both.
Because you know a lot about it, and but I think probably what typically happens is they take it out of the suspect's possession because they don't want her or him to flee at the first opportunity. With the passport, they at least could try to do so, with passport control the way it is these days, so draconian and so authoritarian. I don't know how far she would get with that. They just have to issue a block to all the passport control points, and I think she would have been stopped. However, I think as a measure of added security, in the case here with the Cornish police, they grabbed it. And then my understanding is typically the procedure is they hand it over to the officers who are then escorting her out of the country, whether they be French or English, and then it's taken to France with her or wherever the person is going, but in this case to France, and then it's held by the French authorities that way. But it's very important to keep in mind here that, Lynda hasn't been really charged. Well, she's been charged, but this is all an investigatory detention. It's not that she's been convicted and now
That's a
she's
very
serving.
important point, isn't it, to make
Yeah,
out? Because
it's an
in your
yeah,
article, you had focused on that, Scott, that she is innocent, and she's
yes,
innocent of 9 charges that are leveled against her, which are all actually bogus charges that were fabricated, and that were
that's
also
right.
leveled in identical fashion against David.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's a huge issue in
absolutely
itself.
right. And so what we have is a situation where she's been, in my view, illegally and against EU law and against British law and even French law. She's been unlawfully detained for 4 months. Is it more than 4 months, I think, at this point, and treated very poorly. But I am very glad we got some very competent legal counsel for her. And I think that, if all goes well, and let's keep our fingers crossed and pray to God that she actually gets out of there on December 8th. And maybe we should revisit this sometime then or after to give an update report on it, even if it's a brief one about it. But we're all hoping that she gets out there. Now, one thing, if I may, I have to thank everyone out there who's donated to the National Health Federation. We have been receiving small but plentiful donations from England, Wales, Scotland, Canada, of course, the United States. And these all help to pay for the legal fees because these attorneys, they're reasonable. They aren't, fleecing our skins off our backs or anything like that. They're very reasonable, fair attorneys, but they still cost money. And NHF is not a Fortune 500 company. We can't afford to just, throw money at it. So we really do depend on the donations. So if someone goes to our website, may I give our website for that?
Definitely. And in fact, towards the end, I thought we could talk a little bit more about the actual issues. And towards the end, we can go share screens and we
Okay,
can show the
that's fine.
website and, run a donation call for people. Did David want to jump in and talk about the passport issue? Because I understand from your notes, Neelu, that this is very important, right? I've unmuted him from my end. David, can you hear us?
Only now and then.
Oh dear. Yeah. You're kind of going in and out. So David, if you can hear us, we're kind of looking to you for a little bit more insight into this entire passport issue, which, as Scott explained, was confiscated apparently by the Cornish police, perhaps, and will possibly be returned to her on her way back, like when she is allowed to get out.
Fleury Meragh's prison says they have her.
Have her passport, it sounded like.
Okay, something's happening. We can't hear David again.
Well, just to say, I learned of the seizure of the passport by the Cornish police from David Noakes. So David clearly knows a lot more on this than I do. And it sounded like he said that he had discovered that the prison there that Lynn is at in Paris has the passport. They do have it.
The prison does have it. Okay.
Which makes sense, which follows what I was saying earlier. But I have to admit, mine wasn't from knowledge. It was just from guess as to the procedure.
I see. Neelu, you're muted.
Romola, what I thought is I've got David on the phone now, so maybe we can hear him. David, do you want to talk about the passport issue?
Well, Penmere Station in Falmouth, the police, that's where the police arrested Lynda. And it was actually in Bournemouth that they stole her passport. The police stole her passport in Bournemouth. But Fleury Meragh's prison say they have her passport and her phone. So when she leaves the prison, Scott should be able to get in touch with her, providing she can find a charge. And he's got her number. And she should have no trouble crossing the channel because Fleury Meragh's prison says she's got the passport, so it should be okay.
Makes sense to me.
So there should be no issues with her getting out. Scott, I wanted to actually ask you, and Neelu, definitely want to hear your comments too on this. There was actually a court hearing, right, last week, and is that what really is the place where this issue of the EAW being extended, did it come up? Was there an actual court hearing?
Yeah, that's what I was saying before, Romola, is that on November 26, 2019, in a Parisian courtroom, I'm sorry, I don't know exactly which one, but it's probably the one nearest the prison. There was a hearing, and that's where Chloe Arnoux went in and argued on behalf of Lynn. She'd already been accepted by Lynn and had met with Lynn before. Had been with her at the, what would it have been, November 26th interrogation, and had seen her in prison. So Chloe was there and argued, and
I see. So
really
that happened in a courtroom. I did catch all that, but didn't catch.
Yeah,
that
I'm
it was
sorry.
at
Yeah,
the
it happened in
hearing.
the courtroom.
Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty dramatic because I have to say she pulled a legal maneuver that no one was expecting and won it on really a technicality, but a really important and wide-ranging one. And
That's
I mean,
brilliant.
this could become major law, earth-shaking law in France.
Let's talk about that, because this issue of the European arrest warrant in itself being called into question by this particular hearing, by this particular notice that this judge has now given, that this
Yes.
EAW could be invalid, and thereby all other EAWs that are signed off by prosecutors rather than by judges.
Even old ones, even older ones that still have people in prison because of them. You could suddenly see a whole bunch of people being released from prison on the basis of this if they got wind of it and asked for it. I doubt the authorities will voluntarily go, oh, we made a mistake, everyone out. No, that won't happen. But what could happen is any smart attorneys could seize upon this and use it to good effect, not only in France, but elsewhere. But it's important to keep in mind that French jurisdiction is very wide ranging. I mean, it's probably not as wide ranging as United States of American jurisdiction, which is absolutely horrible and extreme in all respects. Look how they're treating Julian Assange and wanting to try him when, you know, he had nothing really to do with America in that respect. But the French come as a second best on that, but a still strong second best. So it doesn't take much of a connection with France to drag you in. I mean, a French citizen even, say something happens in America and the French citizen is involved, he has the right to seek recourse, or she does, as the case may be, in a French court for what happened. So they deem that they have jurisdiction. So they look for and find jurisdiction as much as they can. And so this investigating judge who issued the European arrest warrant, this Jean-Luc Godot, you know, it's interesting because they have different investigating judges for different sort of tranches of the law. So they have one for health, they have one for finances. And so this particular judge is a financial investigative judge. So he's all about money. And I don't say it in a derogatory way about him, but it's just, you know, his mindset is more
His
about thinking
focus.
about money. Where is money? Where can I find it? What have they done wrong? Blah, blah, blah. And, you know, he inflated, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt and assume it was just an accident. He inflated the amount involved to 11 million euros when in fact it was 11,000 euros. And that became a fact of the case. Well, our legal team hopes to educate him on that and set his mind at ease that, number one, there wasn't any financial swindle going on. Number two, really, this product is not a fraud product at all. There's, as David has pointed out, David Noakes has pointed out on numerous occasions, there are substantial peer-reviewed, published studies on its efficacy. It's been researched for, at this point, 30, 38, 35 years, somewhere in that range, quite substantially. A lot of scientists have weighed in on it. It's been proven in clinics for quite some time. And so we are not talking about some fly-by-night product or saying coconut oil will make you sleep soundly at night, or, you know, it's nothing like that. It has substantial science behind it. And I think once the judge sees that, because he's not a health guy, he's a money guy. I think once he sees that, you know, he'll ease off on the accelerator pedal and relegate this hopefully to the back burner. But even if not that we hope, of course, more than that and just dismiss the charges. But at least if we can get it off the front plate and relegate it to the 10th rate status that, well, it deserves to be to be enshrined in honor, but at least 10th rate status insofar as the prosecutor's office is concerned, then you know, that might help us quite substantially. Because right now they're asking for serious jail time for David and for, well, Lynn's lesser amount, but still for someone who's innocent, for two people who are innocent, and they really had no dealings here in France. This is, you know, this is serious. So we want to get David off, and obviously we want Lynn to get off from these charges.
Absolutely. Yeah, Neelu, did you want to jump in and comment on that, both on the science aspect and the fact that this judge was focused on the finances and the 11 million, you know, the 11,000 that was wrongfully represented as 11 million?
Well, I think you know, that was what they played on, the 11 million. They even Judge Lorraine Smith in the Southwark Crown Court made a very big thing about David's boats and planes. as if that 11 million was actually there when everybody knew it wasn't there. So, you know, to rely on perjury is worrying. And then to rubber stamp it once 10th of May, when Supperstone judgment found it, they should have thrown the case out. They had no jurisdiction to proceed in the UK. I think maybe Judge Goddard acted in good faith because he had MHRA telling the Oculus what to do, and then the 11 million was like a red herring that they used to get him to agree. And then, but then the problem was when that perjury was pointed out in the UK, nothing was done about it. So you know that UK were behind it all along. So Judge Goddard got framed big time.
Yeah,
so he
I
had
think that's a good point.
He had to sit with the more senior judge to really, because he got framed, he had to be pulled out because the French have acted honorably and in good faith. That's what I think.
No.
Very interesting. So would you agree with that, Scott?
Well, I mean, generally, yes, and I would like to think the best in this case. There are other signs that, you know, that go against his good faith, but I think in this case, and Neelu makes a very strong argument that, you know, is very convincing, frankly. And that could be the way to lead it. I can't really say too much because obviously the attorneys meeting was very, you know, a lot of very confidential, but I would say Neelu's not alone in her view on that. And there may be support for it. At the very least, if we make that assumption and we approach the judge from that angle, whether he was really hoodwinked by the MHRA or not may be irrelevant, but he may seize upon it as a lifeline to kind of save himself from the situation and say, yeah, that was it. I was hoodwinked by those bad guys over there in England. And, you know, but for them, I would have found differently. And, you know, it could have been that way. I wish I had been a fly on the wall in the room when that all came down, but I wasn't. So it's all a guess here. And, you know, from our angle, it looks very evil. And, you know, the way it happened and all of that. And, you know, I've gotten glimpses of images of the anger of Godot against certain people in this case. And then, you know, not really paying much mind to it, but you also have to keep in mind, this isn't the only case he has. He may not have given it the attention it deserved. And like Neelu said, relied very heavily on the MHRA saying, hey, we have a bunch of bad guys here and you need to take care of them. And look, it's going on in your own backyard for heaven's sake. And why aren't you doing anything about it? You know, this sort of thing happens all the time. So, but whether that's the reality or just our wishful thinking about this Judge Godot is...
David is trying to come in there. Sorry to be rude.
No, I tend to talk too much. Please interrupt. So I can't help it. It's an occupational hazard, Neelu.
Sorry, what it is, because David's coming through my phone, I'm just going to put the volume up. That is maximum volume. So go ahead, David.
Well, I don't know I want to, but I don't agree with what Scott's just said. And I don't know whether I should say it on the radio at the moment, but so perhaps I should just better shut up.
Yeah, David, I'm trying to keep positive here. Do you know why? Because we need to go further. We've taken the first step and we need to get to the 10th step, which is a restitution of GCMAF on the NHS. Now, I don't know if Scott knows that I'm a qualified pharmacist and I have issues with the MHRA going back 19 years. I already pulled them up on the use of unlicensed medication in children in 2000. So they did nothing about 60 staff that participated in the use of ranitidine in a baby, my niece, 5-month-old baby, that caused her death and mutilation thereafter. So the MHRA have got double standards. And then my sister passed away in December last year from being denied GCMAF. I was trying to find GCMAF. The MHRA had banned it. So I've got 2 deaths directly liable to the MHRA. Then we have the 500 deaths per day from cancer on the MHRA, the liabilities I have. And I can categorically be the witness that the MHRA is unfit for purpose and must be dissolved over this case, as the FDA, as the Oculus. But the Oculus now is kind of in the clear. They were getting framed by the MHRA and the FDA. The FDA is framed MHRA because the FDA is killing 2,500 cancer patients a day. So, you know, they have 5 times the liability in the GCMAF going out. Yes. They've got 5 times the profit. My enemy is the monopoly on patented medicines around the world for the exclusion of natural remedies. That's what the problem is. I want to stay with that, David, because I want GCMAF restituted on the state health service in America, in the UK and France. And Goddard has helped us take the first step. He's got the more senior judge to sit there and do the right thing. Now, Lynda Thayer needs to get better because she's the only woman who can look under the microscope and see these macrophages doing their thing and decide what to do with the patient. So she's got the autism. Imagine autism getting wiped out on this planet in 1 week. That's the liability on these licensing authorities.
That would be huge, right? If that could actually happen.
Cancer will be wiped out within 6 months if GCMAF was to be made available on the NHS and the FDA and the Oculus and all over the world, right? That's where we're going with this, David, and you've got to stay with it, okay?
Yep.
Because the EAWs, the fact isn't that the EAW are got to be rubber stamped in France. The EAWs, I mean, in the highest jurisdiction in France, these were being rubber stamped by the MHRA in order to assassinate 500 people a day. Lynda Thayer was kidnapped. I mean, we don't know. We want to do an investigation into the whereabouts of her passport because it's very relevant when the passport arrived in Fleury-Mérogis prison. Because we know for a fact it did not go with her to France. We know that.
We know that.
How do you know that? I'm curious.
Because Lynda stayed with me, and in June, and she was kidnapped on the 24th of July, and when she went to the airport, she told me she did not have her passport. She came to my house after she arrived from Heathrow Airport, and she did not have her passport. Is that right, David?
Yeah, David was saying it came from her Bournemouth house.
Bournemouth police.
What date?
Before Christmas. It would have been about it would have been about autumn in 2018.
Right.
So it's gone from Bournemouth to Fleury-Mérogis, if Fleury-Mérogis are right, and it is there.
Yeah, my point is that if the UK were able to get Lynda Thayer into France without a passport, then this was an extrajudicial kidnapping for the purposes of a disappearance. She was already collapsing and having resuscitation several times in the several days before her kidnap.
Yep.
And she was medically deemed unfit to travel. So the assassination was slow but progressive, and it was intended to kill her.
Yeah, David Housel said of her in the court last Friday that she was unrecognizable.
That's really horrifying to hear, you know, because that was an eyewitness on the ground.
Well, my view of it is whether the passport accompanied her or not, it was an extrajudicial kidnapping. So, because it was based on an illegal European arrest warrant. So she was kidnapped almost regardless. And, this was wrong. And the lack of concern on the part of the French judges is really abhorrent, that they let people rot in prison while they leisurely investigate a situation. And these are people who should be, under European law, let alone the nation state law, they should be presumed, are supposed to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, and not have their assets confiscated or anything like that until they've actually been convicted. I mean, that's part of European law in the European Convention on Human Rights. You'll find it in Articles 48, 49. And this is, this is also reflected in French law. It goes without saying it's reflected in English law, but British law, but even in France, they're supposed to respect these rights and they don't do it. But, that's my problem with most governments. I mean, you pick a government on the planet and you will find, violations like this all the time, because basically most of the governments are bandit governments that are ruled by a criminal gang. And we keep.
Can I ask you, Scott, sorry to interrupt you, but there's something very important you said there, that the law says they couldn't have taken their assets. Now, we've got 27 staff who were raided, and the GC-MAF was raided. The supplies of it was in the millions. So now that I mean, Lynda Thyer's assets and bank accounts are currently frozen. So are we saying that she's going to have access to her bank accounts and everything is going to be reversed? And how is that process in the UK going to honor the superior judge's jurisdiction in France now? That
Okay. Well, if I may answer that, in France, the confiscation of assets is covered under Penal Code Article 131-21, and this refers only to convicted people. So I was only speaking about it with respect to France. I'm not as up on English law, but I presume there's something like that in England as well. But the fact of the matter is, it's supposed to be very different in the EU than it is in America. In America, he looked at me the wrong way, seize that car and take their bank, all the cash on them and so on. It's very authoritarian in America. You really run a risk every time you cross the border into the United States that if you don't dot your I's, cross your T's, and you have something suspicious about you, that they'll just grab your assets and say, oh, it's the fruits of the crime, a fruit of the crime, and we're going to take it, or it's part of a terrorist or financial money laundering situation, and therefore we have the right to it. Now, keep in mind, in France, if it's a financial crime or related to a terrorist incident, then they do have some sort of authority to grab assets. But still, you have that penal code article that I just mentioned that really only applies to convicted criminals. I hate to call them that, but convicted people. And so in this case, I'm not.
Sorry, Scott, David's one coming in. Go on, David.
Leslie Hutchins, who had a little GC-MAF creams company, which was totally legal, had everything taken from her: her house, her company, her bank accounts, and her car, without a trial. That was before the trial. We are still before the trial. Lynda Thayer, with the 11 million euros she was supposed to have in her bank account, had the bank account closed by Judge Goddard before her trial. The trial has still not taken place. And of course, there's only 11,000 in it, not 11 million. So the French law does not obey the law. And mind you, British law doesn't obey the law. We are living in lawless societies where the courts are a criminal organization.
All right, so David is saying that Lynda Thyre's assets were taken, and there was only really an issue in France for her, and her sister's assets have been taken in France before her trial as well.
No, all she had in France was 11,000 euros, and they were seized. The 11,000 euros were seized.
Okay, so that's maybe something that the attorney can deal with now, isn't it, Scott?
Oh, absolutely. That would be something to be addressed as well. And I like David's mention of Leslie's predicament, because it was incredibly unjust. But that's the problem these days with these lawless gangs who rule countries and do as they wish. And the politically unconnected people, the ones who are just, minding their own business, essentially, are the ones who suffer the most. If you have the political connections like Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, then you can skip out of town with $1 billion. But if you, aren't connected, then, you suffer the fate of people like Leslie, like Lynn, like others. And this is not the way it should be. It should be rule of law, protection of private property, and a system that respects and rewards effort. And we don't have that.
Sorry, could I just before I just want to link in with that topic now. If David's EAW is identical to Lynda's, the court has already dealt with that document, except obviously the first page where his date of birth is different and his name is different. But otherwise, the two EAWs for both of them are photocopies of each other. In fact, they copied David's for Lynda. So could we ask the court to rule on David's EAW, given that they've already ruled on Lynda's?
Yes, and I won't go into what's going on, because that's part of the confidential strategy that's being discussed amongst the NHF legal team. But yeah, that's a possibility, very definitely. And I did allude to it at the beginning when I was first talking about it.
Also, the same applies to all the other GCMAF staff. And then the conclusion has to be that this was a conspiracy to annihilate GCMAF. It wasn't just an accident that the same perjury appears in both European arrest warrants for both of them, that it was deliberate and malicious, and a liability on those deaths to murder cancer patients and make the autistic children suffer unnecessarily, millions of them. Because what we got here is a complete boardroom predetermined massacre of natural remedies.
And you're suggesting, Neelu, that you're suggesting the conspiracy to come down on GCMAF, come down on David, and come down on Lynda, and try to disappear GCMAF off the map is really, by extension, a conspiracy to keep GCMAF as a cancer cure remedy away from the hands of hundreds of thousands in the UK and millions of cancer sufferers in the US, and of course elsewhere in Europe as well. So by extension, you're suggesting this case is going to have huge ramifications thanks to these actions now by this French judge, who has made a distinction between the OCLESP and the MHRA, and determined that Lynda should not be any more held in prison, and this EAW is really not valid.
Yeah, and of course the FDA has to deal with its own, the 102 assassinations of the naturopaths. Now, it's not a coincidence
Right.
that Dr. Jeffrey Bradstreet was shot dead, who was working with Lynda Thayer on reducing the reversal of autism from vaccine damage to 1 week. Now, this is why Lynda Thayer got kangaroo to France without having had wasn't on trial before, whilst David was on trial. They just used that David's trial to get Lynda to go over.
I believe there were about 2,000 autism patients, right, that Dr. Bradstreet had been treating, who'd been showing different levels of recovery. And I know David has the actual statistics always at his fingertips as to what percentage of that showed a real improvement within 1 week of treatment.
David, do you want to come in?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, with our original GCMAF, 15% of autistic children, non-verbal, recovered in 2 to 6 months. At the end, when we were using ultrasound probe with Galeg, we were taking autistic children, and 60% of them recovered in a week from non-verbal autistic kids to completely normal kids who went back to normal school.
Absolutely extraordinary figures, and so it's not just cancer, it's autism, and there are implications for other diseases as well that could improve dramatically with the use of GCMAF, right?
There are 50 diseases. They're all listed on the gcmaf.se website.
So this is actually a huge case, sort of a foundational case, it appears, for the future of health for all humanity, right? And that's sort of how you see it at the National Health Federation, right, Scott?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, from the first time we publicized GCMAP back in the fall of 2008, 11 years ago, and on, we've been on this story. And in fact, I used to do tours with Ian Crane in Western England talking about GCMAP in 2009, I believe, when I was doing that. And then Ian, bless his heart, took up the mantle after I stopped doing those speaking tours, and he would then mention GCMAP as well. So we see it as a key issue, and we've always done that. We were the ones fighting to legalize Laetrile, which is another form of cancer treatment, less successful, but still nonetheless something that has worked for various people and for other means. I mean, people should have the right to choose how they deal with their own health issues, and it's no one else's business but their own.
Absolutely. I'm just sharing the screen showing your website, Scott, National Health Federation. I do encourage everybody to go to it. The nhf.com is what it is. And I've just clicked open the news release that you had posted on this story. Victory in NHF's fight to free the innocent Lynda Thayer. This is fantastic. So this group of people is this a photograph from France or the UK?
UK, London, actually.
London.
It's one that David sent us, so David knows a lot more about the provenance of this photo than I do.
Maybe Neelu could also address it, because this is a subject that you had brought up earlier to me, Neelu, about a public outcry being needed. And indeed, there has been a public outcry, hasn't there, both in the US, the UK, and in France, but particularly in UK, as we can see, there's been actual people on the streets holding up signs, speaking out.
I'll let David speak. David, the day that we were in London, can you tell us what that was about?
Well, there were 200 people in Parliament Square, and we were asking for the release of Lynda Thayer. Everyone had their own banners and their own T-shirts, and we were publicising GCMAF. So we went to the Free Party headquarters, who were close by, the Labour Party, the Brexit Party, and the Conservative Party, and they all flatly refused to receive our A4 envelope with 4 scientific research papers on GCMAF inside. All the parties flatly refused.
That's pretty terrifying, isn't it? If all of the
Yeah.
parties refuse to get informed,
Yes,
refuse to get educated, just refuse information. Let's just close our ears and keep going on our merry way. That bodes ill for governments, I would imagine. So, but it's so encouraging to see that people, forget governments, forget the people, behind those ivory walls and towers, etc. People on the street and people who have family who, suffer from these dreadful diseases are very interested in GCMAF, right? I understand that now, David and Scott, you have a very hefty number of followers on YouTube, right?
Yeah, David knows more about that than I, but I understand there are 500,000.
500,000 followers. That's very encouraging,
Half a
very
million,
reassuring.
yeah.
500,000.
Well, as David puts it, it's a start.
David, sorry, David.
Well, we've got 500,000 hits on YouTube on GCMAF so far. That's Lynda, Thayer, me, and GCMAF.
Wait, David, I thought you said it was 500,000.
That's what I just said, 500,000.
I'm teasing you. Okay. You didn't take my bait.
Right.
Well, this is a great article. I encourage everybody to go and read it because it tells the whole story that, Scott has been relaying again today. And there is another website, and this is it. It's nhf.co.uk. And there's a lot of information on here. I was delighted to find earlier, Scott, information on the Codex Alimentarius, and I hope you'll come back again to this channel sometime and talk about that, talk about, the
Yes.
latest on that.
Yeah,
'Cause
we
I think
just came from a meeting that NHF was at last week in Germany on that very thing. So I'd be delighted to.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. We definitely should follow up on that. And you had mentioned asking people for donations for this particular fight for Lynda Thayer. So where exactly on the website can they go to donate?
Well,
And I
you
will
would
try
go
to
to the
click on-
donation page, which,
Oh, there we go.
yes, you're at the right
Donate.
area. Donate in there and just make sure there should be a kind of a comment line. And if there isn't, we pretty much know from this time of the year that it would be for Lynn and David, but it wouldn't hurt to say, have the donor mention your program, which would give us some good feedback, and say it's for, freeing Lynn Thayer or for David Noakes or that sort of thing. So we know, really how to allocate it. I mean, we're already pulling money from our general funds and have done that to pay the attorneys. But this latest outpouring, and I don't know why it is, maybe you, David, Neelu, others have been spreading the word, which I appreciate, but we have a large number of donations from the UK, which are much appreciated from people we haven't really heard from before. But I just want to reassure all of those who have donated that we're putting it towards getting Lynn and David out of this this tragedy that's, this sort of Shakespearean tragedy that's unfolding here and that we're still in the middle of, and to really protecting the rights of everyone out there to access GCMAF, good, pure, and healthy and really life-giving GCMAF that's being denied them right now by the MHRA, by Health Canada, by the FDA, by essentially all those equivalents in the European and other countries. And so we're really dedicated to making this happen.
Absolutely wonderful. And there's all sorts of gifts that you're offering, books for
Oh,
donating
yeah. Thank you.
$150 or more, or $50 to $100. The Codex
Mola,
Alimentarius.
you're doing, you know our system better than I do. Thank you.
I looked at this earlier, well, not this page, but I looked at your Codex Alimentarius video, and I personally think it's fantastic that you are following up on that subject, and
Thank
everybody
you.
in the world should be informed. So
Thank
this book
you.
might be the way to get informed
It's true.
in a hurry.
Well,
So
anyone who donates $120 or more, which obviously is less than £100 sterling, or is it sterling anymore? Well, in any event, if they donate that, they get Kelly Brogan's new book, which Own Yourself, which is really fantastic, just has been reviewed in our magazine. And they also get the Codex book sent to them. And it's sent from California, so be a little patient because that's where our headquarters are. And it may take about a week to get to you, maybe a little longer, depending on US and British Post, but it will, Royal Post, but it will get there. And in any event, oh, and there's some other choices as well. That's right. Thank you for showing that. I had forgotten that they had given a variety of choices there. But I would say the newest book in the pack is Own Yourself. The vitamin D book is really, quite honestly, excellent. And for health freedom fighters, Byron Richards, who unfortunately died, gosh, maybe 8 years ago, 6 years ago, but was really wrote a dynamic book on how to fight for your health against the FDA, but it's really translatable to almost any regulatory agency. So it's worth reading as well. There really are a number of books there that are good, but we'll throw in the Codex Alimentarius book as well. So thank you for knowing our website better than I do.
Oh no, I'm just going down over
Mentioning
here.
that.
You're very welcome. So I'm just going to stop sharing and come back to the studio. This has been such a fabulous conversation today. I think you've covered so much ground. And, I thank you all for speaking your mind and speaking openly about the tyranny of governments in preventing health and human rights from coming to the fore for humanity, which is a situation all of us need to change. And it seems like this particular case might indeed be the way forward to make it possible for this kind of change to actually happen in France, in the UK, and eventually in the US as well, I hope. So any last words from anybody on this subject?
Well, if I may, I would just say, persistence really is what wins the day. So I really encourage everyone out there to be persistent. I mean, just really keep at it and be what I call persistently vocal. It's not enough to just write one letter to your member of parliament and then sit back and watch reruns of Gavin and Stacey. What you really need to do is write that letter, then pick up the phone and call them, then send them an email, then go visit them at their offices personally, and then take your friends and visit them either at their district office, whatever you might call it, or they're in London at Parliament, and then start the process all over again, then write them a letter and so on. Now, I realize we all have other things to do. We have jobs, we have family, we have vacation, we have other concerns. Maybe that we're even involved in lawsuits or other things with other people. But if you take a little time out of every day and you make yourself heard, the squeaky wheel is indeed the one that gets the oil. And believe me, they'll be so sick and tired of you after getting all of those, they'll want to do anything to shut you up and get you quiet. So,
that's fantastic advice. I mean, honestly, I think so many of us need to hear that we need to keep knocking on those doors. We need to keep speaking out, keep writing those letters, right? And not stop.
We really do. Just the watchword is be persistently vocal.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Scott, for reminding us of that. Neelu, any last words from you or from David? I mean, if he wants to tell us too what he thinks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited that, I didn't know Scott's an attorney, so he and I could put our minds together because, he's in America, and I think he's in America. Yeah, he is in America. So I think that America's going to go first, at restituting GCMAF without the monopoly of the synthetic patents. So we got to remove the monopoly. We've got to get the naturals in there. And we've got to start manufacturing GCMAF in America first, because that's where it was before they shut it down. But now I think we're going to have to work backwards. Start with America and then come down.
Good point.
Fascinating. I would definitely welcome that. And I'm sure everybody in America would welcome that. Yeah. Don't you think, Scott?
Yes, I agree with both of you. They would. very much so. And
Mhm.
it's, really in demand. And unfortunately, with the shutdown of immunobiotech, they're getting much poorer quality and obviously less access to the product that could save lives. And it's a shame. I mean, you even had Alex Cairns there in the UK who had his own radio program, and he died recently, and he could have been saved. He had cancer, and he could have been saved had he had access to Immunobiotech's GCMAP. I mean, real GCMAP like that company makes. So it was really a tragedy when I heard that he had died just a couple of months ago. I forget where he was. He was in Milton Keynes or someplace like that, but he couldn't be saved.
Yeah,
It's
that's
it's a
really
sad
sad.
situation, and we'll see more of that as time goes on, where people who could have been saved are not. So we really need to turn this around as soon as we can, so that people like Alex and others can be saved.
And
So
hopefully the
I'm appointing
revival of immunobiotech, right?
I'm appointing Scott as the top guy of health in America, and I'm appointing David Noakes as top guy in the
All right.
Thank you. Well,
Remember, you heard it here first.
I heard it here first. Well, it is funny, Neelu. I was one of the first two food and drug lawyers west of the Mississippi in the United States at the time there that I started practicing food and drug law, and I won't tell you the year, but I was one of the first two to do that. Now they're a dime a dozen west of the Mississippi because the East Coast law firms have spread all over. But most of them have their training really with the FDA, and they have that sort of FDA mindset. So it's really nice when you have people who are willing to go up against the FDA. And I don't mean just attorneys, I mean people like you, pharmacists, who will go up against the MHRA or the FDA or Health Canada or any of those who need to be stood up against because they really aren't operating in the public's interest. These agencies all get captured, whether it's a trucking commission, whether it's dealing with the airlines, whether it's dealing with food, whether it's dealing with drugs, they all get captured. It's a fundamental law of nature. They will inevitably, sooner or later, sooner rather than later, be captured by the very industries they're meant to regulate, and they will become lapdogs for those industries, and their goal will not be to protect the public. Indeed, it's a waste of time to expect them to do that, but they will be there to keep out the competition, and they do it through coercion and through the force of law that the companies of and in themselves cannot do. So when people, and I laugh whenever they say this, they think, oh, the balance to the big evil corporations is to give more power to the government. We need to have a more powerful regulatory agency.
Regulations, yeah,
Yeah,
regulatory bodies.
the big corporations, they love that. In fact, they pay money and encourage people to say that. They get, their little shills out there to beat the drum for more regulation because you know what that means? They have the attorneys and the consultants and the accountants. They can pay them galore to deal with the maze of regulations. They could care less. But what about the mom and pop stores? What about the medium-sized stores? They get crushed by the regulations. They're driven out of business. And what happens? Economic power consolidates even more to the big corporations because these little regulatory guys, they aren't going in, excuse me, they aren't going in sanctioning GlaxoSmithKline. Look, they didn't even get a fine for all the deaths from Vioxx, but look what happens to Immunobiotech. They're attacked mercilessly. And this is all from those people who think, oh, we need to give more power to the regulatory agencies. Well, to hell with that. They don't need more power. They need a lower budget, tighter budget, and they need oversight. And in some cases, they need to be driven out of existence because they aren't protecting the public. They haven't protected the public for probably their entire lifespan of their existence. And people need to wake up and not just go by the nice little mantras that are said about, oh, it's a public agency and all of that. Well, let me tell you, politicians and these regulatory people, they put on their trousers one leg at a time, just like the rest of us. They are just as venal. They are just as less interested in the public health or in public interested matters as anyone in business. So if you think businessmen are bad, just imagine that kind of person having coercive power in the government, because that's exactly what's happening. So it's a big, big myth that's out there that we need to have a more powerful government to counterbalance the corporations. It's not going to happen. And that's part of the problem. And that's what we're fighting as well at NHI.
And we're talking about public-private partnerships and, people being on the boards, etc. The revolving door, the
Yes,
faint
the
revolving
revolving
door,
door.
right? Yeah.
It's horrible. And I
So
see it
these,
all the time. It doesn't matter the country, it happens. And I've even seen it at Codex once. I saw someone at the Codex office, his eyes lit up when he heard that a former associate who had worked with him, she was now making quite a considerable sum of money consulting for private industry. So if they don't know about it, they soon enough learn about it when their comrades or colleagues go and start working for private industry. And it's just, like you said, it's a revolving door. It's insane, and it should
in
not be
every
allowed.
industry, including healthcare, of course. So
Yes.
I'm so glad you spoke out about this, and hopefully this is a subject that definitely needs to be revisited. I personally am all for public speaking, open speaking about these matters, and I'm so thrilled when people, are unafraid to speak their minds. So I thank you so much for speaking out this afternoon. I thank David as well. Is David on the line, and would he like to say any last words, Neelu?
I
Or?
called him back to ask if he wanted to come back on. He said he was very happy with the show. And because he had company, that I promised him it wouldn't take more than half an hour. So
Yeah.
he
And
came
I
on.
should go as well.
Okay, okay. So on that note, I'll just thank our viewers. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned. We'll come back with more, hopefully with better and brighter news about Lynda Thayer and GCMAF and immunobiotech as the weeks proceed. And hopefully, again, we'll definitely have Scott again, and of course, Neelu, to talk about these matters once again. So thank you again, everybody. Have a great night, great evening, and we'll see you
Thank you.
again very soon.
Thank
Okay.
you, Paula. Excellent.
Thank you.